God of War. Joe, here's what's amazing about Game Informer to me. Is we're going out on this trip to check out the new God of War on PS4, and then Joe just casually mentions, I guess I did a feature back in 2004, 2005 on the first God of War.
Yeah. I have been visiting Sony Santa Monica for 13, 14 years now. Yeah.
It's absurd. What other outlet has that kind of longevity where it's like, creators have come and gone, returned, like Cory Barlog, the creative director for this time around.
Yeah.
Joe Juba has maintained a constant visit out to Santa Monica to visit the Sony studio to learn about God of War.
Wasn't there something too where your subhead for that article was like of God and monsters or something like that, and people picked that up as like the subhead for the game for a while?
Oh man, yeah, that was. You're right. I'd totally forgotten about that.
Might have been God of War 2.
I think it was our God. Yeah, it was either the God of War 2 or 3. Did we do a 3 cover? I think. Oh yeah, we did. So for one of those, I called the story something like Gods and Monsters or something. And then when people started making on their sites making SKUs for the game, they used my story's name as the game's subhead.
Oh my gosh.
Which was fun.
I like the idea that the game had the word God in it twice.
Yeah.
God of War.
: Gods and Monsters.
Instead they get rid of all anything. This is the phrasing, they call it reimagining, I guess. Soft reboot is too much of a stretch, but it's
still a sequel, right?
Still a sequel.
It's the same Kratos.
Yes.
Which is, I think, why it's not in a sense, it's a reboot because they're kind of starting anew conceptually with it. But story-wise, it's the same Kratos that,
New tone, basically.
New tone. And it's interesting talking to them just about the fact that it is the same Kratos. I'm like, what has he been doing? And they say, there's a big gap between this and God of War 3 because I wanted to leave that space open for the future, whether it's, some comics or some Powers-esque TV show. You never know, but...
Yeah, and I didn't even necessarily get the sense that they were leaving that open for more to capitalize on that time frame for different projects as much as just we're not talking about what happened there yet.
Yeah.
So, it could be between now and when the game comes out. Maybe they do reveal more about what happens in that time.
Maybe there'll be some flashbacks in the game.
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know. Yeah, we don't know. And so Kratos went to Scandinavia. I mean, the best mythology. Everybody
of course,
agrees, right?
Why not?
It is the best, right?
Some lutefisk.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so he went there, and he's trying to hide his family away from the gods. Is kind of the impression here, Joe. Is that your sense of it as well?
I don't even know if they've said that much about it, as much as they were super coy when it comes to details on what exactly sets them off on this journey, how Kratos got to where he is, all of that stuff. But that's the impression that I got was definitely Kratos is trying to keep a low profile.
Yeah. And the easy, I think, people think God of War. Oh, it's just gonna be Kratos going up there and just murdering all of the Norse gods, but they're like, not necessarily. It seems like they're taking a slightly new approach. But Joe, if you had to put money, he's probably gonna kill a Norse god at some point.
I don't think that they were saying that there was no god murder going on.
But he's not on a vengeance quest as far as we know at this point.
Yeah, that's specifically I think the important takeaway is that it's not not okay, here's my assassination checklist that I need to go down.
Yeah, he's not Arya Stark.
How did I played all those games, but I don't remember I know at one point he becomes basically the God of War.
Mm-hmm.
And then does he leave that throne behind? Does he still have all his god powers? Is he still technically a Greek god?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's what's confusing about it.
Can we spoil the original God of War trilogy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
he's half god to begin with because he's Zeus's son.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So
he always had that within him. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's still a god even though he left that destroyed world behind, and trying to map out how are you guys doing this? What is this like? We have a rapid fire interview going up tomorrow.
Oh yeah,
which will shed a little bit of light,
good.
and then we dive more into it in video features throughout the month coming up later and stuff. But it is a weird nebulous concept of how does this work? Is there a defined border between mythologies? But the way they describe it is it all exists in this kind of nebulous timeline.
Yeah. That's sort of the various mythologies can coexist and are maybe more geographically separated. Is sort of what it seems like, because there was a while where they were talking about the fact that Egyptian mythology was on the table. It was basically we're going to either do God of War Egyptian myth or Norse myth, and they ended up going with Norse. But I think the idea they're not taking, at least the sense I got was that like Egyptian myth isn't necessarily off the table. It's not like there's only Norse and Greek gods in whatever world they're in, you know?
Yeah, to a confusing degree. That was one of the big shocking things from the trip and visiting the studio is how open they were. And maybe it's just Corey likes to talk and he's a very eloquent guy. But they were surprisingly open about like just tossing out different mythologies. Some of these are coming up in the videos later in the month about like, yeah, no, we could go here, maybe we can go there in the future. And it kind of zooming out, it feels like they're just in a large way trying to kind of excite people about this brand again. It's been a while since Ascension, and it is a super exciting idea to kind of open this up. Like it's more than just the Greek world. Like Kratos can go anywhere, do anything, as the Reading Rainbow song implies.
Well, it's funny because the series has kind of always been that open. Like even the original God of War, there were special like bonus features on it that showed like abandoned stories and like a story about their brother that they didn't like end up going down and exploring until like the PSP games. So the series has weirdly always been like, well, we don't know where it's going to go next. We're excited to explore it, you know?
Including, I had no idea, but a lot of this trip was learning a lot about God of War. Apparently, like they even reference like Christian mythology in the original God of War at some point.
Oh, really?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's like, well, they didn't quite go down that path. But the thing goes in one of those concept pieces.
There's also a concept piece that is like has it modern too. That I think like has a bunch of, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like a bunch of helicopters and like military vehicles discovering like a Titan out in the desert or something.
Oh,
that'd be kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, so it's weird to think that the bonus features on the original God of War are carrying through today in the studio, even though it's not David Jaffe who's that creative director.
Yeah.
It's Cory Barlog, who was the creative director for God of War 2.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, they're just trying to excite people about this brand again. Like he even said, like, oh, we want this to be on the same level like an Uncharted or an Assassin's Creed. We want this to be a huge, expansive universe to kind of carry on into the future.
But and one thing I want to stress about that too, before everyone starts saying like, oh, like multiple games confirmed or whatever. I mean, like, I don't think it's a stretch to say like, yes, if this game is successful, Sony would want to like keep capitalizing on that.
No, I don't know.
But I mean, like, it also doesn't seem, from what I got, that they are necessarily like really planning super far ahead about like, oh, this is a brand new. It doesn't feel like they're getting ahead of themselves. Everyone seems like right now, it seems like people are most concerned about like this game and the technical and like gameplay challenges involved with that. But everyone sort of also acknowledges like, oh yeah, I mean, if this is successful, there are places we can go.
You can't help but daydream about it a little bit. And they weren't even as specific as, you know, the Norse trilogy or anything like that. Like who knows if they're going to break it up by actual pieces of hardware that the games are out on or some other way of defining like when exactly they would change up the mythology again. But that was one of the surprising things too, is we talked to them about kind of like the origins of the project, and Shannon, the head of the studio over there at Santa Monica, and she wanted Corey to come back because she wanted an old timer. Jaffe was busy, wanted an old timer to come back and kind of like reboot things and get it rolling again.
Quick question there. You said Jaffe was busy. Did they at least consider it? I mean, did you guys talk to them about him at all?
She did say that, but it was unclear of how serious that ever was.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't say like, oh, Dave Jaffe was our first choice, but he couldn't do it, so we got old silver medal here. You know. It was
good nickname though.
It was more. I think the sentiment was generally like if we want to reimagine this franchise, we need people who are like intimately involved in its creation, who are familiar with its past. And one of those, like, there are two people who fit that criteria, and one of them is not available.
Yeah, Corey had worked on the first game, correct? Like,
he was an animator.
The second one, but he was also there.
I was excited when they announced Barlog because I really love 2. Like 2 in some ways, maybe like. It is like my favorite first experience, if that makes sense. Like my first playthrough of 2 was probably my favorite among the trilogy. So
oh, cool.
So what has Barlog been doing like since 2?
He calls it like his wandering. I forget how we're gonna hopefully have him on the podcast at the end of the
that'd be cool.
to kind of dive into that stuff.
He was doing like a Mad Max thing for a while that fell.
He was working with George Miller for a while, on some sort of Mad Max related something or other. But what he talked about at the studio, which is interesting, was his time at Crystal Dynamics, where he was. The way he phrased it, at least, he said he was going to be leading up the sequel to Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider.
The sequel to Rise of the Tomb Raider?
I'm sorry, the sequel to Tomb Raider, which was Rise of the Tomb Raider.
Which became Rise of the Tomb Raider.
But he knew he wanted to make a game about a lot of snow, but he wasn't sure exactly where to do it. And
someone with some kind of axe of some kind, or
so he's had an interesting journey throughout all of entertainment, and I really hope he talks more about it in the podcast.
He was working on that Mad Max game for a while.
Right, that's exactly it. Yeah.
But that's not Is that one linked to the Mad Max game that actually came out?
I don't think
It's connected. I mean, it's the same
Okay.
studio, but I think it went through a big reboot and kind of separated itself more from Fury Road, was my impression.
Okay.
From going on that cover story, that
Yeah.
once he left and kind of direct involvement with George Miller left, even though there's still tie-ins with Fury Road, like the
Sure.
War Boys and stuff in that Mad Max game that did come out.
Yeah.
I think it definitely changed.
So it's interesting. It seems like he started a lot of projects, but he hasn't been able to see them through
Yeah,
until presumably this one.
and this one seems like a very tough one to see through all the way. But just talking about the new God of War and why it's difficult, like I was struck that they were explaining just that they really had to pitch a lot of people on making this new God of War, to the point even that it seemed like, did they have to convince Sony to make another God of War? And Shannon even said, like, hey, it's kind of like a make or break for how we see the studio. Like, this is the defining thing of the studio. And it seemed like the development team was the one really pitching, like, let us make another one.
Huh.
Yeah, I think a lot of that ties into the fact that, like, okay, so like God of War 1 and 2 definitely like hugely successful. I think 3 was also very successful. But when you get along to Ascension, I think you have people sort of like, and I don't think this. I think the studio definitely got the sense from the fans, loud and clear, that like we're kind of cooling on this a little bit, and this
Right.
like, formula is starting to get very familiar and stuff like that. And I think that perception was also, and I don't know who's in charge of making these decisions or something, but like whoever it is was also aware of that perception, to the point that like, yeah, God of War was great, but like Kratos' story is kind of done, right?
Right.
So you're really going to have to do some work to convince me that this franchise that people sort of maybe see on the sort of decline is worth like reinvesting in.
And nothing's more exciting than going to Scandinavian mythology, which I feel like maybe it's just because I like that mythology, but I was just championing for years, like, oh my God, wouldn't that be so much
Yeah.
more exciting if he
Yeah.
went to a different mythology like that one?
Yeah. Well, and I think, this comes across in the story, if you read it too, is that like, I think a lot of what made this game possible is the fact that it is so different from previous God of Wars, that it really is like, I mean, like Ben started off saying, like a reimagining. It has Kratos, but like, it's a very different God of War, to the point that like, if you are just like slavishly devoted to that old style of combat and stuff, like this is different. They're not pretending like this is the game that is for all of those fans.
It's not really for God of War fans, is kind of what you're saying? Like,
No,
I mean, they
that's
hopefully
not what
will
I'm
like
saying.
it, but
It's just different.
okay.
So it's like, if like at some point, if you're a fan of any series, I think you need to acknowledge that it's like a need to evolve at some point, right? So it's I think a lot of their effort went into identifying how you can make God of War evolve, still retain the things that people identify with in that series, and the things that make it successful, without necessarily feeling like, well, we need to have the camera pulled out this far, and like things like that.
Do you know what that initial pitch was that finally convinced the higher ups that, all right, God of War approved?
Snow and mountains and cool
That's
Norse
all it
gods.
takes.
No, I don't know. I mean, definitely it seemed like the overall drive for this game was to make it more intimate. Visceral is the classic overused phrase, but just pull that camera in. And the camera work is something that the team is very, very focused on. Like the interesting thing is that like the camera never cuts. So when you're playing the game, as long as you don't go in the menu, it's like one long continuous take if you do it all in one go, which is a cool idea. How did they phrase it? Oh, they called it a living nightmare, trying to technically make this work. And it's a cool little detail. And Corey has an interesting take on it, saying that like, oh, this is separating video games from films. We don't need to use editing and cuts. I mean, that's film verbs. Games should do their own thing by not cutting at all.
Well, what's weird is like Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice did the same thing with their camera.
Yeah.
And that was also a Norse game.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting how they overlap in some weird ways. Some similar ideas, which I'm sure they thought of independently. They weren't like, oh, Hellblade, we should do that.
Right. No, absolutely not. I think that is a larger thing. And we talk about that in a video interview coming up later in the month on the site. Just that idea of there is this larger trend in the industry towards let's focus on some low-key drama, hit some bigger range of emotional notes. Let's get a companion in there. I mean, the easy thing is, oh, they wanted The Last of Us up, the God of War series. But comparing it to Hellblade is an interesting one, because definitely watching Joe play the game, my main takeaway was like, oh, this is more gamey than I expected. Don't think this is some art house piece. You know, like there's it's still in some ways a God of War game, and I think you go into that well in the cover story, Joe.
Well, thank you.
Have you ever guys noticed though? So Atreus is the huge thing with the new God of War. It's
The
Kratos'
sun.
Yeah,
huge
the sun.
He's actually pretty small physically.
The
but
tiny, tiny sun that runs around with you throughout the game. There is.
he climbs you like a colossus, right?
That's exactly it. But tell me if I'm reaching to think like Sony more than any other publisher is so focused on like the buddy dynamic in games.
Let's put children in dangerous situations.
Why do you think that is? I mean, you can go back to like Team Eco. It seems like
Yeah.
Naughty Dog was heavily influenced by Eco, and then everyone's influenced by Naughty Dog. You can go back, like, Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. Like Sony and the buddy dynamic has been this weird ongoing thing for years.
I remember the Prince of Persia, the 2008 one, the open world Prince of Persia. They were talking about that idea of like just giving you a companion and how it like personalizes any sort of video game adventure just tremendously. Like having Yorda with you in Ico, or even Navi in Ocarina of Time. Like just having someone to go along with you just like makes the journey just that much more impactful.
It
And I
helps
think
for, like,
Sony's like
story.
acknowledging that. Yeah, it helps the story. It helps to have someone to talk to like while you're on an adventure. And I think
And my favorite conversation topic, hey, there's a ladder over here.
that's why you're always yelling that around the office.
Hey, jump up here. Oh, I think you can boost me up there.
But I think
okay.
you're right. I mean, I think Sony has like acknowledged that maybe more than others, that it's like just having an AI character with you with you during the course of a game makes it somehow just like it makes the experience less lonely and more interesting.
Yeah. Even though it seems extremely difficult to get right. I mean, it seemed like the overwhelming theme of a lot of studio visits, but especially this one is like, hey, games are hard to make, and this one is brutally difficult trying to get Atreus better and better and better. And they talked about like, focus testing. It was just wave after wave of focus testing to get it to the point that he's not an annoying companion that you have to, hold his hand throughout the experience. But hopefully you will grow to love Kratos' son. Anything stand out to you about the development of this game, Joe, from our brief glimpse at the studio?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of something that I haven't just said several times already, but I think part of it, what you're talking about, is like about the camera stuff. I think it's interesting that for something, if I were designing a game and I were to be like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have a no-cut camera? And the technical team were to come to me and be like, and say the things that this technical team said, right? About how hard it's going to be, I would be like, oh, okay, we don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Like, gamers know what a normal edits, cuts scenes, like, people are familiar with that. If it's going to be that much work, we can do without it.
Yeah,
but this is why I'm not a game director, because like, I mean,
even like Hellblade, which is like a good point of comparison for that one specific idea, like it's not super noticeable. It's not like you finish Hellblade and you're like, oh, wow, you know what? I felt like I never left Senua's side.
And that's part of what would influence my decision there is like, okay, what's our payoff here?
Right?
Yeah. Like not only hard work is bad, but hard work for what benefit? And it's like something that players probably wouldn't be able to say like, oh, it's really cool how this camera doesn't cut. But the team at Santa Monica, I think, had an interesting take on that, which is like, even if only the like film nerds or whatever will be able to like instantly tune into what's happening camera wise, it still has an effect, right?
It's about how it feels.
Like, even if you're not like, hey, the camera hasn't cut. Yeah, it's about how it feels. You'll still feel more. I mean, the idea is you'll still feel more immersed in that action. It's still going to feel more present. It's still, like...
Yeah.
I mean, the easy example is we're talking about a lot about no-cut cameras on this trip. And it's like, oh, the Death Stranding trailer recently. Like, maybe people didn't realize that there wasn't a cut in that trailer, but maybe one of the reasons that had such a big impact on people watching it was it was all just this one seamless shot.
I didn't actually even notice that until you just said it. But
And playing the God of War, new God of War, maybe you'll have the same thing.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, because it's one of those things I knew going in for Hellblade that it was like that. But like, a lot of times I wasn't even thinking about it, like Kyle said. But I do think, like, whether I was conscious of it or not, there is sort of something that provokes within you when you're actually playing a game.
Yeah. There's a sort of intimacy that it just creates, regardless of whether or not you can identify it.
Yeah, and also it was fascinating talking to the team about just bringing that camera in for the new camera perspective so close to Kratos, and like, what does that mean with... They're not saying that it's in there, although I guess in some trailers you see like the Midgar serpent and stuff. But just like when it comes to seeing huge enemies, knowing that camera is going to be so close to Kratos, like you can no longer just fully zoom out and have this crazy thing where he's running some thumb
Well,
of some
You can't
titan.
go up Mount Olympus and take a quick look at Hercules before you make your way up to the
Couldn't
mountain.
they
to see
theoretically
Poseidon.
zoom it out? Like, just because you guys didn't see it doesn't mean they couldn't, right?
I guess they could. It definitely seemed like they wanted to keep that camera behind Kratos at all times.
I don't know. I mean, I guess if nothing else, I would not expect that to happen all the time.
Okay.
I think it would change up the feel of combat so drastically. It'd be kind of off-putting compared to the slightly more kind of sort of isometric view or just kind of above view from the previous God of Wars.
And that's like, I don't know if it's a camera thing necessarily, but like those old God of War games, especially the first three, like were so, like there were a lot of epic moments in there. And like the camera definitely like zooming back and like seeing this giant thing that you're scaling, like that sold that moment.
Yeah.
And do you guys get a sense that they're still kind of going for these epic moments? Maybe they feel different because of the camera, but they're still kind of going for those like, you know, big beats.
I mean, I'd say take a look at the E3 trailer from this year where they show like the world serpent emerging, right? Like that is a huge monster that conveys this like this like enormous presence that they pull off without making Kratos a tiny little speck, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'll just feel completely new coming from that type of perspective and whatnot. But I feel like you're kind of loosely hinting at it, Joe, but it does certainly feel like Cory Barlog has a lot of juice, as they say in the studio, a lot of sway. To be like, yeah, let's do this no-cut camera. It's like, okay, here we go. This is going to be a rough ride.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see how the final... How that decision plays out over the course of the whole game, versus the time that we spent playing.
Yeah, I mean, reading your story, Joe, I really love the God of War series. I'm a big fan of it, and reading your story, like I'm super excited for it, but it does seem dramatically different than God of War. You know, like it feels like it is a new game with a familiar character in a weird way, just based on our perception of it from going on the trip and stuff like that. So I'm very curious to see how it all comes together.
Yeah.
So after seeing the game up close, are you like more excited or less excited or still normally excited?
I mean, it's hard for me to answer that fairly, just because like like Kyle. I mean, like I have been covering these games for so long. I've been a fan of them for so long that
Joe gave God of War 3 a 10. Everybody,
that's true.
I did. It's just like, I think my excitement for a new God of War game has always kind of been at maximum. And even when there are things where it's like, I wonder how that's going to pan out. There's still, like, I guess like with any game, I'd like to keep a level of optimism and be like, hey, hopefully they can figure that out,
Well, hey, month of coverage, GameInformer.com/God of War. Anything you're looking forward to people seeing throughout the month, Joe?
Boy, yeah. So, well, you already mentioned it, but those rapid fire interviews are always fun to do, and then fun to see the reaction to once they're out. So.
It is fun, and you never know like how a director is gonna like what he's gonna think of being in such an absurd situation for filming those. But Cory Barlog could not have been more on board for doing a silly video like that. But there is a lot of info in that video. It's going up Friday, so if you're listening to this or watching this, then you can check it out. It'll be on Game Informer's site and eventually on the YouTube channel and stuff. But it contains a lot.
Yeah, we also had a good time playing some God of War 2.
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that one. Yeah, we do kind of like a developer commentary for God of War 2.
That's awesome.
For the opening with the Colossus of Rhodes and
fantastic.
And whatnot.
Yeah, the beginning of that game is so good. It's
it's
absurd. Really it's stupid.
It's just stupid.
It's so dumb. I can't believe Corey did that.
We played that for about, I think, a half an hour and just sort of chatted.
I think it was closer to an hour. Turns out we really took our time with that baby.
Anyway.
Yeah, so check it out. A bunch of fun stuff coming up on GameInformer.com/God of War throughout the month. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.